The rails are still there, not metaphorically, physically, cut into stone, pressed into earth, running across hillsides and through mountain passes across 4 continents. In some places, they are partially buried. In others, they sit fully exposed, and you can measure them. And when you do, something quietly uncomfortable emerges. The gauge, the distance between the parallel tracks, matches. Not approximately, not close enough to be a coincidence of engineering logic. It matches with a consistency that the accepted historical timeline cannot easily explain, because the sites where these tracks appear were supposedly separated not just by oceans, but by thousands of years of independent development, and yet the measurement comes back the same. The question isn't whether the tracks exist. They do, and institutions catalog them carefully. The question is what they were part of, and why that question tends to stop just short of an answer. We are told that large-scale organized transportation, the kind involving fixed routes, standardized infrastructure, and coordinated movement across regions, is a product of the industrial era. The narrative is well established. Prior to the 19th century, movement of people and goods relied on foot, animal, river, and sea. Roads existed, but they were local. Networks, in the modern sense, did not. This is the accepted framework, and within it, the physical evidence that still exists in multiple parts of the world creates a technical problem. In Malta, on the island's limestone surface, there are parallel grooves worn into the rock. They have been studied since at least the 19th century. Archaeologists note that they appear to have been formed by repeated passage of wheeled vehicles. The grooves are deep, in places exceeding 60 centimeters, which implies not a few journeys, but sustained and heavy use over a long period. Some of these tracks run directly into the sea at coastal edges, continuing underwater, suggesting the land configuration was different when they were in active use, or that whatever created them predates the current coastline. The official classification is cautious, prehistoric cart ruts, possibly Bronze Age, possibly earlier, origin uncertain. What the classification does not address is the question of scale. The volume of wear represented in those grooves implies a level of organized, repetitive movement that Bronze Age cart use does not straightforwardly account for. That detail tends not to be the focus of the official description. Move to the Andes. The road system attributed to the Inca Empire is, by any modern assessment, remarkable. Approximately 40,000 kilometers of road running through some of the most difficult terrain on Earth. High-altitude passes, dense jungle margins, steep canyon walls. The roads were engineered. They included drainage systems, retaining walls, and step sections cut directly into rock faces. There were rest stations at measured intervals. There were suspension bridges. The official account describes this as a product of the Inca state, built primarily in the 15th century using a labor tribute system called mita. This is the accepted explanation. Here is where the timeline creates a difficulty. The Spanish arrived in 1532. Within decades, detailed administrative records of the Inca state began to appear in colonial documents. But the Inca themselves did not use writing. The complexity of the road system, its engineering specifications, its geographic scope, its maintenance requirements, implies a level of coordinated institutional knowledge that normally requires written technical documentation to sustain across generations and regions. The Inca used quipu, knotted cord records, which modern researchers have partially decoded as numerical and administrative tools. But no quipu has been interpreted as containing engineering specifications or route maps. The road system exists. Its method of design, coordination, and transmission of knowledge remains at a technical level incompletely explained. And then there is a second problem. Spanish colonial records note that when they arrived, portions of the road network were already in disrepair. Sections existed that local Inca administrators did not claim to have built and could not account for. This detail appears in early colonial documents and is occasionally referenced in academic literature. It does not feature prominently in the standard presentation of Inca road history. If portions of the system predate the Inca, the question of who built them and when does not currently have an answer. The pattern of unexplained infrastructure appearing across multiple cultures and regions is not limited to roads and tracks. It extends to the specific technical characteristics of how those routes were prepared. Roman roads are perhaps the most documented example of ancient transportation engineering. The standard description is accurate. Layers of material, compacted base, cambered surface for drainage, stone paving on primary routes. Roman roads were built by Roman legions and have been extensively studied. The engineering is understood. What is less routinely discussed is what happened to Roman road-building knowledge after the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century. The knowledge did not transfer. There is no gradual decline in road-building quality, no period of simplified technique, no apprenticeship of successor cultures learning a reduced version of the method. The capability simply stops appearing in the historical record. Medieval roads in Europe are categorically different. Earthen, poorly drained, seasonally impassable. The gap between Roman road engineering and medieval road conditions is not a gradual degradation. It is close to a discontinuity. This raises a specific question about how technical knowledge is transmitted. If the Roman method was the product of gradual development, centuries of incremental improvement, then its disappearance should also be gradual. Developed knowledge tends to leave traces, partially skilled practitioners, regional variations, simplified adaptations. What the historical record shows instead is an absence. The technique appears fully formed in the Roman record and does not reappear until the 18th and 19th centuries, when road engineers began, independently, to reconstruct similar principles. The official explanation, that the knowledge was lost with the collapse of centralized state organization, is reasonable as far as it goes. What it does not address is why no regional version of the capability survived, even in areas where Roman administration persisted for centuries after the formal collapse. Standardization is a technical marker that deserves particular attention in this investigation. Modern infrastructure is standardized because standardization is a deliberate, coordinated decision. Railway gauge, road width, bridge load ratings, these are set by institutions and enforced across large systems because without enforcement, variation naturally occurs. Different builders working independently produce different measurements. This is precisely why the consistency observed across certain ancient transportation features is difficult to reconcile with the accepted model of independent regional development. The standard railway gauge used across most of Europe, North America, and large parts of the world today is 1,435 millimeters, 4 feet, 8.5 inches. This measurement is often described as an inheritance from early British railway builders, who themselves may have derived it from pre-existing road rut widths. Some researchers have traced it further back to Roman road and cart standards. Whether or not that specific lineage is accurate, the general principle it raises is significant. If a measurement can persist and propagate over centuries through infrastructure inheritance, then the presence of consistent measurements in geographically separated ancient sites becomes harder to dismiss as coincidence. It raises the possibility that some of what we are looking at as independent ancient development may instead be the remnant of a connected system, whose connecting tissue is no longer visible. The evidence for this is indirect. It is not proof. But it is the kind of indirect signal that, in other investigative contexts, would be considered worth pursuing. In this context, it tends to be noted and set aside. There is a category of ancient transportation evidence that does not fit comfortably into the independent development model. And it appears in the Americas, Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia within roughly similar technological periods. Megalithic transport. The movement of extremely large stone blocks, sometimes weighing hundreds of tons, over distances that range from tens to hundreds of kilometers, often across terrain that presents serious logistical obstacles. The official explanation for how this was accomplished varies by site, but generally involves some combination of sledges, rollers, ramps, and organized human labor. These explanations are plausible for moving large stones short distances under controlled conditions. They become progressively more difficult to sustain as the distance increases, the terrain becomes more complex, and the precision of the final placement is taken into account. At Baalbek, in present-day Lebanon, 3 stone blocks in the foundation of the Roman-era temple complex are among the largest ever used in construction. Each weighs approximately 800 tons. A 4th block, still partially quarried nearby, weighs over 1,000 tons. The Roman construction at the site is documented. The foundation stones are not. There is no Roman-era record of how they were moved or placed. The standard assumption is that they were moved using the same general methods proposed for other ancient megalithic sites. The technical problem is that even modern heavy lift equipment, cranes, hydraulic transporters, specialized vehicles, works with significant operational complexity when moving loads in the 800-ton range. The idea that this was accomplished with wooden sledges and ropes is not impossible in principle. It becomes increasingly difficult to support when the precision of placement, the distance from the quarry, and the absence of any documentary record are considered together. At no point does the official description of Baalbek directly address how the largest foundation stones were moved. The Roman construction is described in detail. The pre-Roman foundation is categorized as ancient, attributed to earlier civilizations without specification, and the method is noted as unknown. The evidence doesn't disappear, only the explanation does. Return to the transportation network specifically. One of the more analytically significant details in the global record of ancient routes is not the routes themselves, but the consistency of their placement logic. Roads, paths, and trackways across multiple ancient cultures tend to follow specific principles. They avoid low ground where possible. They use natural ridgelines. They cross water at the shallowest or most stable points, and they connect specific categories of location: settlements, resource extraction sites, high ground positions with long sight lines. This is not surprising. These are logical engineering choices. Any civilization, independently, would tend toward the same solutions. What requires more explanation is the evidence that some ancient routes used alignment principles that go beyond practical logistics. Researchers studying ancient trackways in Britain, the road systems of pre-Columbian North America, and certain routes in the Middle East have noted that some paths maintain alignments over very long distances that do not correspond to the shortest practical route between endpoints. They appear to follow astronomical alignments, solar or stellar, or to connect sites that share specific geographic or geometric relationships. The official response to this observation is cautious. Some alignments are acknowledged as possibly intentional. The broader pattern is generally treated as uncertain or coincidental. The question this raises is not mystical. It is technical. If multiple separate cultures in multiple separate periods were embedding the same type of non-practical alignment logic into their transportation infrastructure, one of two things follows. Either this represents a convergent cognitive tendency, humans across cultures independently prioritizing the same abstract organizational principles, or it suggests a shared technical or conceptual inheritance that the current model of independent cultural development does not account for. Neither conclusion is available with current evidence. But the question itself is rarely framed this way in institutional descriptions of these sites. There is a structural silence in the historical record that this investigation keeps returning to, where operational infrastructure exists at scale. Roads, ports, transit systems, distribution networks, documentation normally follows. Not immediately perhaps, but proportionally. The Romans documented their roads extensively: route maps, engineering manuals, administrative records of construction and maintenance. Medieval European trade routes are documented in merchant records, tax documents, and church correspondence. Modern infrastructure is documented to a degree that borders on redundancy. This makes the absence of documentation for certain ancient transportation systems analytically significant. Not just the absence of engineering records, but the absence of any operational record. No accounts of movement along the routes, no records of goods transported, no administrative acknowledgement that the infrastructure was in use. The Nazca lines in southern Peru are among the most studied examples of ancient, large-scale ground marking. They include geometric forms and zoomorphic figures, but they also include long, straight lines, some extending for kilometers across the desert plain. Some researchers have proposed these are astronomical markers. Others have suggested ritual pathways. The most straightforward physical observation is that they are lines on the ground, some wide enough to function as cleared paths, running in directions that in some cases connect elevated positions. No operational record of the Nazca lines exists. No contemporary account describes their creation or their use. The culture that created them, the Nazca people, left no written record. What they left is the physical marks themselves. The official classification is careful and honest about this. The purpose is unknown. What tends not to be examined is what the absence of any record implies about the conditions under which the lines were created and used, and whether those conditions were more organized and more connected to a broader system than the isolated regional culture model suggests. There is a particular moment in the 19th century that deserves attention in this investigation, not because it is dramatic, but because of what it reveals about infrastructure inheritance. When railway engineers in Britain and the United States began standardizing track gauge in the mid-1800s, the process was contentious. Different gauges had been used by different railway companies. Standardization required costly conversion, but what the historical record shows is that the measurement that ultimately became dominant, that 4 feet 8.5 inches, was not selected through rigorous new engineering analysis. It was selected largely because it already existed. It was the measurement of pre-existing tramways and horse-drawn rail systems which had themselves inherited it from earlier road ruts. Engineers did not design the standard, they inherited it and institutionalized it. This process of inheriting a measurement or method from a prior system without fully understanding its origin, and then treating the inherited standard as a self-evident practical choice, is precisely the kind of process that can obscure the origin of very old technical decisions. If the measurement was inherited from Roman road standards, the practical engineers of the 1800s may not have known that. They simply used what worked and what was already present in the physical infrastructure around them. The possibility this raises is uncomfortable, that some portion of what we describe as modern infrastructure development was actually reconstruction, the reinstitutionalization of standards and methods that already existed in forms that were no longer fully understood by the people inheriting them. How much of what we built in the industrial era was genuinely new, and how much was recovery? There is a category of physical evidence related to old transportation systems that receives relatively little analytical attention: the underground infrastructure. Beneath several European and Middle Eastern cities, tunnel systems exist that predate the construction above them. Some of these are well documented: aqueducts, drainage systems, cellars. Others are less cleanly categorized. Networks of underground passages in Paris, Rome, Istanbul, and Edinburgh include sections whose original purpose is not established, whose construction method is not fully explained, and whose extent is not completely mapped. The standard academic position on these systems is measured. They are the product of multiple historical periods of construction and modification, and their complexity reflects layered use over time. This is a reasonable position. What it does not account for are the sections that appear, on technical analysis, to predate the layers above them by a margin that is difficult to reconcile with the official historical sequence of those cities. The construction technique in some deep sections, the cutting angle, the wall material, the structural approach, does not match the techniques of the periods to which those levels are officially attributed. These anomalies are documented in engineering assessments. They appear in technical literature. They do not tend to appear in the public-facing descriptions of these sites. The institutional description focuses on the known history. The portions that do not fit that history are noted, categorized as uncertain, and set aside. The evidence does not disappear from the record. It simply stops being the focus of the narrative. Consider what a functional, large-scale transportation network actually requires. It requires route planning across terrain. It requires engineering capable of preparing and maintaining surfaces. It requires standardization of vehicle type or load to justify standardized infrastructure. It requires coordination between points, some form of scheduling or administrative management. It requires, at the operational level, a degree of institutional organization that is not simple and not self-sustaining without deliberate maintenance of knowledge. This is the baseline for any transportation network that operates at scale. The question this investigation keeps arriving at is not whether ancient cultures were intelligent or capable. They demonstrably were. The question is whether the model of isolated independent development accurately accounts for the consistency, the scale, and the technical specificity of what the physical evidence shows. The isolated development model predicts variation. Different cultures working independently should produce measurably different solutions to the same problems. What the physical record shows, repeatedly, is a degree of consistency that the model does not comfortably predict. The mainstream response to this observation is that convergent solutions are natural, that logic drives similar cultures towards similar answers. This is true, and it explains some of the consistency. It does not fully explain the specificity, not just similar solutions, but matching measurements, matching material choices, matching alignment principles, across sites with no documented contact. At some point, the convergence argument requires its own explanation. There is one more detail worth examining carefully before this investigation reaches its limit. In multiple parts of the world, the physical remnants of old transportation infrastructure were incorporated into later construction without being understood by the builders who used them. Roman roads were used as foundation material for medieval structures. Pre-Columbian routes in the Americas were adopted and extended by Spanish colonial administrators who did not record where the original routes came from. Ancient trackways in Britain were paved over by 18th century turnpike engineers who noted their presence and continued building on top of them. In each case, later builders recognized that something useful was already there. They built on it. They did not record what it originally was or where it came from. This is a pattern of inheritance without comprehension. The infrastructure was treated as a resource, existing, functional, practical, without being understood as the product of a system. The system was gone. The physical remnant of it remained. If this pattern repeated across multiple cultures and multiple periods, what it suggests is that the infrastructure in question may be older than any of the cultures that subsequently inherited and built upon it, and that the original system, whatever it was, however it operated, whoever maintained it, had already ended before the cultures we study in recorded history began to build on top of it. That is not a claim. The evidence does not establish that with certainty. But it is the logical implication of a pattern that the isolated development model does not explain. The evidence points in a direction. The official narrative does not follow it there. What this investigation identifies is not a single anomaly. It is a category of anomaly, consistent, geographically distributed, technically specific, and recurring in the historical record across cultures with no established contact. The physical evidence exists. It is cataloged. It is studied by institutions whose work is serious and careful. The anomalies within that evidence, the unexplained measurements, the absent documentation, the capability gaps, the patterns of inheritance, are also documented in technical literature, in engineering assessments, in the cautious footnotes of academic papers. They are rarely the subject of the main explanation. The mainstream account of ancient transportation history is not false. What it may be is incomplete. The portions of the record that do not fit cleanly into the accepted model are not ignored. They are acknowledged, noted as uncertain, and placed at the edge of the narrative where the light does not reach. The question this investigation cannot answer, because the evidence to answer it has not been found, or has not been made the focus of serious institutional inquiry, is what the full picture looks like. Something moved across these routes. Something built them to consistent specifications. Something maintained them long enough for the evidence of heavy use to be pressed into stone, and then that something stopped. The roots remain. The capability to explain them does not.